Welcome to all our friends joining today's open lecture webinar on making winning decisions, understanding your unconscious mind. On behalf of Ahmedabad Management Association, I have a great pleasure in welcoming all of you on this evening lecture, online lecture, to be offered by a very young professional, Mr. Nikhil Raval. I am very happy to say that Nikhil Bhai is a leadership and learning advisory global educator. And Nikhil was in USA for almost more than a decade. He has worked there in USA. He got his degree in Bachelor of Finance from Michigan State University and then MBA Strategic Management from California State University. With 25 years of experience, I think what he has done is he has worked in several global, regional, and Asian companies to improve organizational results by focusing on challenge and the interactions of business and people. 12 years of high-end leadership consulting, which has provided strong perspective of talent, challenge, and solution. I think in today's world, I think all of us are really appreciating the need for bringing in talent, but how challenging it is. Getting them is one point, retaining them is another point. So I think he's very good at talking about that. So please, over to you, Nikhil Bhai. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Pathak. It's a great pleasure. So once again, very good evening to all of you, and what a generous introduction by Professor Pathak. I had the good fortune to work for just a few years underneath him during the stint at EDI, and I learned very much. And I think he's been very kind in sort of telling my own background, but we'll go straight to our topic today. We've got an hour, so let's get straight to this is a topic which I hope that there is a lot of curiosity, as Professor Pathak was saying a little while back, that at the end of the day, when we think about people in our personal life, or whether in the corporate world, or you think about a business leader, there is so much attached to, and there's so much written about, you need to have good IQ, and you need to have good EQ, and you need to have a digital quotient, and all of that being true. But at the end of the day, the one success criteria of an individual, whether it's in a personal life or even in the corporate world, is the ability to make good decisions. And as we heard, that decision making in its simplest sense is something that we all know, are very familiar with. It's not a new concept. We all take decisions every single day. But how is it that do we take the best of the decisions, right? That's the question. And there is so much now research done on the subject to say that despite the fact that we would have looked at all the data, we would have done the analysis, we would have looked at all the choices, we would have done the pros and the cons, we still end up sometimes not taking the best decisions. And so how does that happen, right? So that will be the intent of my 60 minutes. The next 60 odd minutes, we will take about 45-50 minutes to share some basic concepts of that. I'll share with you some of the key biases that we all fall prey to generally, both in our personal lives as well as in our professional lives. And then, of course, we will talk about ways in which we can overcome that. So that will be our intent. For those who can, if it allows, please do turn on the video so that I can make a visual connect with each of you and just make the learning a little more exciting. So let's get underway. This will be the agenda for the day. I'll do some context setting in terms of why decisions matter. Then we'll take a look at, why is it, is it hard to get really good decisions? If you think about Jeff Bezos and what he has created in Amazon, he says that, my top leadership team doesn't really need to, work all day. All they need to do is come up with 1 or 2 good decisions in a quarter. That's all that I expect from them. And therefore, good decisions have a process, right? So how do you do that? Then we'll talk a little bit about the biases itself. What are biases? How do biases happen? How do they originate, right? The fact that I'm talking about biases, we may even take a view that, I already know about the biases. I don't think I can fall prey to them. I'll prove you just wrong, that we all fall prey to biases. In fact, we'll do some fun experiments as we go through this session. And then, as we heard, we will have a little bit of time on Q&A in the very end. Okay, so you heard a little bit about my background, so I don't want to take more time. This is my quick journey. I took that flight to the US, did 14 years of my vanvas into America, and then came back, spent my early education there and the graduate studies. I had a chance to work in financial services industry with firms like American Express, Schwab, Franklin Templeton. And as I came back, I said, I will do just about anything, but not venture into training, teaching, consulting. But sometimes life takes you where when you least expect. And in my very last role, I had a chance to head as a country head, one of the largest global leadership consulting company is their India head. And so it was a great ringside view of working with some of the senior most leaders, both in India and the APAC region. So that's a little bit about me. Okay, so we will go forward. Some ground rules. This is something that you all would be familiar with. We'll keep you all on mute just to make sure we minimize the noise. If you have questions, you can put them into the chat box. Please also keep your cell phones on silent. If there are questions, you can use the raise your hand button, thumbs up or clap if there's something that you agree or like. And if in the process you lose any connection, there's rain happening, light rain in Ahmedabad. So please join us back. We will be here. So those are some ground rules for you. Okay, I'm going to begin with an experiment, and I want to make this session very interactive. So I have a picture here, and I don't know, Professor Pathak, if the chat will be available for everybody, but I want to ask everyone in the audience to see that. Can you tell me who lives in this house? So just go ahead and put your responses in the chat.
Chat will be available. The unmuting, I think we'll have to see.
No problem. We don't need the unmute now.
Okay.
The chat, as long as the chat is fine. So what I'd like you to do is take a minute, take 30 seconds. Again, it's not a trick question. I want you to take quickly and just tell me, who do you think lives in this house? Okay, and just don't think too hard. You don't need to analyze. Whatever comes to your mind, just start writing down. And I want to take a quick stock of what are the different kind of responses that we are seeing. So I am already seeing the people saying, okay.
Response started coming.
So Sandeep Bhai is saying a billionaire businessman. Dipali is saying some successful being. Okay, excellent. What else? Yes, someone is saying a human being. Okay, all right. And let's see who else. So we saw 3 responses, all different. Anybody else with anything else that comes to mind in terms of who lives in this house? Now, typically, so you can keep responding as we go through. Now, typically, when I ask this question, okay, we have some more responses trickling in. Someone says CEO of Microsoft. Khushbu says there's a young couple's house. Kanu says he's a successful person. Okay, so no problem. So we've heard at least a half a dozen responses, and every single response has been a different response, right? Now, in my experience of doing this both in India and outside, I have seen that typically I will see a whole range of responses from people telling me this is a Bollywood star, this is a Hollywood star, this is a white couple, this is a surfer's house, this is a designer's house, and so on and so forth, right? So if you think about it, what just happened, right? What just happened? What we saw was a simple experiment of what we call is a perception bias, right? So normally when I put this picture and I ask people to give me different responses, they will all give me different responses, and the responses are actually justified based on saying that, look, if it's a clean house, it has to be a lady's house. Someone tells me, said that, look, if you see the 2 clocks into the room, that could be a trader. Right? Someone says that, okay, if it's by the ocean, it is a retirement home, right? It could be a young person, right? If it's someone says it's a politician because only rich people and politicians can afford a house like this. So again, all of the responses that you hear may be correct because admittedly, I have not given you much time. I've only given you 30 seconds and I've asked you to give me a response. But what has happened is that I have given you one common piece of data, and yet we have seen that everyone has, in a matter of about half a minute, we've seen that people have arrived to different conclusions, right? So what has happened? That's what we call as perception bias. Perception bias is nothing but the way we interpret the world that we have, that is in our minds, right? So if I came to this session and if I had blonde hair and if I had a particular kind of a long earring, you may have a certain perception about me, like, okay, who is this guy? Who is going to talk and who is going to tell us, right? So we all carry certain perceptions. And how do the perceptions happen? Well, the perceptions actually happen through what we call in leadership as mental models, which is nothing but our worldview of how we see things, right? So our mental models are basically shaped by um, all of our life experiences. So right from our childhood, we see when we grow up, to the schools that we've gone, to the friends that we have, to the professional colleagues that we may have had, to the traveling that we may have done, to the friends that we've had. Each of these things have an impact and shape the way we think and we see the world. Now, in this experiment, what we saw is that we saw a piece of data. We took a partial piece of data. So somebody would have just taken this clock and said, you know what, this clock means there is a trader. We took a partial data and then we attached a meaning to it based on a certain worldview that we carry. Now, there are numerous experiments like this that have been done where we've not looked at all the data. We've just attached a meaning based on how we see the world, and then we jump to conclusion. And that what's often happens in what we think about decision making, right? This is what we call as mental models and jumping up that ladder and inferring our decision making. Now, we will go into understanding, first of all, let us understand how does our brain work when we think about decisions itself. What is this thing called a bias, right? How do the biases originate, right? And then we look at some very common biases with some really fun experiments that I'll do right now to actually make a point that, look, we all have been prey to biases, right? Okay. So first things first, if we think about, and as I mentioned earlier, decision making is something that's so critical that on an average, they say a human being takes close to 5,000 decisions a day, right? So from the time that we get up, from which side of the bed, how do we hold the brush, what to wear, which road to take, what to eat, when to sleep, all of them are decisions, right? So we take decisions both in our personal life as well as in our professional life. In professional lives, we will have all kinds of decisions: what to launch, whom to hire, when to promote, which geographies to be in, and so on and so forth, right? So in many ways, everything that we do in some sense is kind of a decision that we take. Right? Now, let's first spend some time trying to understand how does our brain work in making decisions. So all of us, you can think about, and I'll try to make it simple without trying to make it a biology class, but just there is a lot of curiosity now in neuroscience and leadership, and therefore I want to just spend a couple of minutes to give you this basic orientation. If you think about the brain, there are three parts to it. There is the brainstem, limbic system, and neocortex. The brainstem is the part of the brain which basically controls our hunger, our temperature, our food, and so on and so forth, right? And this is the part that keeps us going. Anytime that we see that we're out of sync, something's gone wrong with the brainstem. Limbic system is the one that resides between neocortex and brainstem, and is basically the part of the brain which creates that fight or flight response, right? So if we see a lion in front of us, we want to run, that's a trigger generated in the limbic system. And the neocortex is the front part of the brain, which is essentially the part of the brain which processes high-end decision making that we all have to take. All the critical decisions that we take in life is what happens at the neocortex, is in the front. Now, in our brains, there is this thing called neurons. Neurons are nothing but, basically, you can think of, information processing cells or information processing units which take everything that comes to us from our day-to-day experience, and they form a pattern in our brain. So if we go somewhere, neurons are absorbing information. So what happens in a typical day? Most of us, when we have to take so much decisions, our brains have so much information coming that the brain does not have the time or the luxury to process every information, right? So typically when you get something, it will process it. It will look at if there's something like that has happened in the past, and then we will take a decision. But because of the fact that there is so much of that happening, we tend to resort oftentimes to what we call as that there's a trigger that can happen, and instead of processing information, we default back to a habit. Okay, and then we come to a response. Now, many times when we default into a habit and take a decision, there isn't anything wrong. Maybe 80% of the time, 70% of the time, even that habit could generate a good decision, but not the best decision, right? And that's what we have to try and avoid. So there is a lot of work done on how decisions should be taken versus how they are actually taken, right? So there are all these theories about decision on deductive logic, probability and statistics, game theory, and so on. So in an ideal situation, our brain should be processing information to take decisions that way, but we actually don't do that. What we end up doing is that we take the information that's coming to us every day, thousands and thousands of pieces of data. We only take data that is relevant to us, and we jump to a decision. Now, this happens subconsciously. We are not even aware of it. A majority of the times when we do that, we could have still taken a good decision, but not the best decision. And we are not even aware of it, right? So let me put you through a very good, fun, quick experiment when I say this. There was a gentleman called Daniel Kahneman who won the Nobel Prize, and he came up with this book called Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. And what he says is that our brain tends to take decisions in two ways. There is something called system 1 and system 2. System 1 is the part of the brain which takes quick decisions. System 2 is the part of the brain which takes slower decisions, which means that you have to analyze, you have to look at the data, you have to look at all the things, right? And therefore, this is the part in which we see that despite the fact that if we would have done everything possible, right? When we take quick decisions, it's the system 1 thinking that's come into play, right? That means that we're jumping to conclusion, we're not analyzing, we're just rushing into decision. All right, let's do a quick experiment. I am going to put on your screen 10 words. I want you to quickly look at them, no picture to be taken, just 5 to 8 seconds, and I'm going to ask you to remember this word. Okay, now, okay, everybody ready? Now, when I ask you which words were there on this, you need to simply put a yes or a no on the chat. Okay, so did you see the word pajamas on the screen? Yes or no? Yes. Okay, did you see the word bed on the screen? Yes or no? Yes. Okay. Did you see the word sleep on the screen? Okay. That's the point. All right. So we have a lot of people saying, many people saying no, but a fair number of you saying yes. As you can see, sleep wasn't on the list. So what just happened? All the words that are there on the screen are associated with sleep, but sleep itself is not there because our brain is thinking if it's nearby to sleep, sleep must be there. So we've taken a shortcut and we've jumped to a conclusion, right? So normally when I ask, half the time people will make that error. Many of you who have a sharp memory will say, no, it wasn't there, but many of you ended up saying yes. Right? So just you can look at the rest of the word. There's night, there's pillow, there's blanket, there's pajamas, but there isn't any sleep. Okay. All right. I want you to quickly read the word in the color it is written. In the color it is written, read it in your mind. And when you make an error, just put I in the chat and be honest. Okay. So I want you to do this exercise. So the first word should be actually red. The second word should be actually blue, okay, then green, and then so on and so forth. So just continue to read through it and make sure that if you falter along the way, then you need to put it in the chat that, okay, yes, you ended up reading the word and not the actually the color in which it was there. Okay. All right. So some people are actually finding that, wow, this is hard to do. So I see some expressions in the chat. Okay, excellent. All right, I'm very impressed. So far, no one's made that error. So maybe you've seen this, you've done this before, so no problem. Okay, another quick one. A bat plus a ball costs 1 rupee 10 paisa, right? The bat actually costs 1 rupee more than the ball. What is the cost of the ball, right? How much do you think the ball costs? Quickly. What's the answer? Okay, so everyone is saying 10 paisa, 10 paisa, and that's incorrect. Okay, that's our instinctive decision making, right? Our instinctive decision making says 1 rupee plus 10 paisa equals 110. It says it costs 1 rupee more. If I take 10 paisa and subtract it from 10 or from 1, what happens? It becomes 90 paisa, right? Which means it's not 1 rupee more, right? So again, at the first glance, it seems like a logical thing to do. The real answer is actually not 10, but 1, it's 5 paisa. Okay, so it's 105 plus 5. Okay, and if there are people who are curious, I can actually show you the math also how to get that, but in interest of time, I'll move through it. And this is an experiment that's been done everywhere, right? So when we do 1 plus 10, people normally just take the 10 paisa, but it's actually, if you do mathematically, it's incorrect. Again, the point of this is not so much to get lost in that, but to say that we've rushed and taken a shortcut into decision making, right? Which of these two lines, if you look at system 1, system 2, which one is the longer line? The first one, the middle, or the last one? And you can put it on there. Okay, all are equal. Okay, Sandeep. I think Sandeep figured it out when I accidentally showed the second one. Then you're absolutely right, Sandeep. They're all the same, right? They appear to be different, but they're the same, right? Excellent, correct. Again, because it's us taking a glance at the data and quickly rushing into this, and therefore they are the same, right? And we've seen this. There is a sphere here, and if you look at that, both the spheres are same, right? So anyway, that's just some context setting to just let you know that bad decisions can happen because our brains can get hijacked based on the underlying biases that are there. The underlying biases are created because of the worldview that we develop, and we're not even aware of it. It's subconscious. Now, as I mentioned to you, the biases that happen, what happens is that we think that we've taken the best decision, but we haven't, right? And so let's now go into some biases to give you a bit of kind of a story of what do I mean by that, right? How many of you here like to go to a movie? I hope that you like to go to a movie. Yes, give me a yes, no. And now, when you go to a movie, oftentimes, sometimes, every once in a while, you run into a bad movie. When you're into a bad movie, what do you end up doing? Do you end up leaving halfway through, or would you rather stay? Like you've stayed through the interval, you've stayed half time, and then you say that, you know what, I might as well go through the second half. How many actually go through the full movie? Stay till the end. Okay, Namrata says stay, right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we all tend to do that. I have done that, right? It could be a horrible movie, and then we say that, you know what, I might as well do it, right? Now, if you think about that, it's not the best decision, right? Let's examine this closely. I have spent 300 rupees to buy a ticket. I now go to watch a movie. I watch it for 90 minutes. I realize it's not a good movie, and then I still continue to watch it. Now, whether I stay or whether I leave, the fact that 300 rupees is not going to come back, it's gone. You cannot go to the ticket, the window fellow, and say, hey, listen, can you please give me my refund back for the first half, the second half? That's not going to happen. But the fact that you stayed through one half, you are trying to justify that decision by saying that, you know, let me just stay now the second half. I have gone and ridden for 5 kilometers. I've already had the popcorn. I have someone with me. Let me stay back. So that is what we call as the sunk cost bias, right? Because as humans, we have a huge aversion to loss. We want to minimize our losses. But in reality, to stay back for the next 90 minutes, it's not the best decision. We're justifying that decision to stay back because we've already spent the 300, and we say that, you know what, I've spent it. It's not going to come back. Might as well stay and let me enjoy the second half. Hopefully it will get better, but that's not the best of the decision. So again, the point of this is very simple. You could stay back. It's not a big deal, 90 minutes slot. But if you look at it in the most technical sense, that's probably not the best decision, right? We worked with one of the largest banks in this country, and we worked for their senior leadership team for close to 5 years. Now, this is the time when the king of good times was still in India before he went out. And one of the general managers was actually in charge of lending money. And he told me that, Nikhil, this is not a king of good times, he's a king of bad times. And I said, what do you mean? He said that, look, you just watch, he's over leveraged himself, he's bought all these things, and his airline's going to crash. Right now, I said, well, if that's the case, why are you still lending him money? But he said, look, if I do, we've already given him so much money. We are hoping that if we give him a little more, it can turn around. Right. So in the banking space, we see this all the time. Right. You know that you've given a loan and you want to justify that decision. It's a sunk cost. It isn't coming back. But to justify what you've done, you try to give a little more in the hopes that that'll turn around. And so he's saying that I'm going to give a little more with the intent and hope that he can turn around. As we all know, that hasn't happened. Now, as against that, we worked with another very large family-owned company of India, and they were into organized retail. And they had organized retail chains across India. And what they found out in 2 years that they couldn't scale up, right? Because in organized retail, there are all kinds of issues. You have issues with hiring talent, working capital, supply chain, real estate is expensive, all the things. And so what they did is they said that, look, you know what, we have not been able to scale at the level that we want. So we're just going to cut our losses and when we go, and that's it, right? So there wasn't a decision that said that we will justify what we've done and we'll continue to grow in this, trying to further our losses, right? So in one story, you can say that they tried giving bad loans after bad loans to recover something that wasn't going to come back and justifying that. Now, another thing that we found out in that bank is that when I said, look, if this is not coming back, why are you doing this? And he said that, if I raise my hand and say that this is not coming back, I will become the black sheep in the system. So it is very important for us as managers, as leaders, that when we see a sunk cost kind of a decision making happening, we need to do the following. So how do you debias it? First of all, especially in the lending business, those who are in the lending business, whether it's a SFC or a bank or credit union or whatever, right? We see that if you see that there is someone trying to fall prey to sunk cost, they're justifying trying to throw good money after bad money, you need to stop that. Second, you want to make sure that if you can have someone who can look at these decisions with a fresh set of eyes. And third, you want to make sure that you do not create a failure-fearing culture. A lot of times companies, when you take a bad decision, they're so afraid that they will continue to take more bad decisions. It's best to come clean, say that we've done a bad job, and therefore not do it again. But the sunk cost happens when you keep justifying that decision that you've taken, trying to make sure that it's going to go away, but it doesn't happen, right? So that's the first one, sunk cost bias. Now, another one of our key bias is what I call as the confirmation bias. The confirmation bias is very simple. We tend to look for data that justifies our belief. So if I feel that the world is becoming a horrible place, then when I open my newspaper, I will start looking for data that justifies that. There were all these shootings, there were rapes, there was killing, there was theft, there was robbery. All that I read is looking for data that justifies that. But if I say that, look, there's still good left in this world, there is goodness, I will look for data that justifies that, right? So that's what we call as confirmation bias. People are either good or people are either bad. Now, what's the danger in that? There's a huge danger in that. And I want to quickly tell you my own son's story. So when he was in 10th standard, when he graduated, he passed 10th, he got very good marks. And we were, as a family, trying to say, okay, where does he go from here? Commerce, science, arts. Now, just to give you a background, my father was actually an arts major, and he traveled more than 70 countries in his life. I have an uncle who is a science major. He's a brain surgeon in the US and doing extremely well. My brother is a commerce graduate, and I have other cousins in the family who are commerce graduate and become extremely successful entrepreneurs. So every time my son would talk to my father, to my uncle, to my brother, and all the people in the family, he would get the data that says that, you know what, You can have a promising career in arts. You can have a promising career in science. You can have a promising. So he was becoming more and more confused. So we said, what do we do? Because they were only telling him the one side of the story, right? So we said, how do we solve the problems? He went to the principal and the principal says, have you looked at also the data against each of these that he may or may not know, right? So for instance, if you think about science, how many years do you have to put in before you can become a successful doctor and establish a strong practice? How many engineers today are employable, right? We say we produce a lot of engineers, but are our engineers employable, right? In commerce, if you want to become a chartered accountant, great. How many of those actually pass on the first trial? So it's important for you to get a better perspective of any decision when you see both sides. If you see only one side, you're often getting into a blind spot. You don't get to see the other side of the decision making, and therefore what happens is that you sometimes what we call is we end up doing what we call an overconfidence bias or a survival bias. So if I see only good, it's like me saying, well, I want to get into the IPL. For every person who makes it into IPL and who makes a lot of money, there are so many who don't make it. So it's important for you to have that. Now, in the workplace, in the business world, in the organization context, what happens? If you are supporting a project and you send a mail to your colleagues, you will look for the people who are supporting your own belief. You're not going to look for data that's against that. So it's important to get that perspective. And I want to share with you examples. Elon Musk, who's created Tesla and now is doing such big, bold things. He says, I do not want to hear views from my team who agree with me. I want people to tell me a very distinct, different opinion. That doesn't mean you have to disagree with me, but if you have a different opinion, you need to tell me that. The US Army has a concept called red teaming. Red teaming simply means that whenever they are going on a mission, they will share the mission to some people who don't know anything about the mission, and they were wanting to know that, okay, if we go to the mission, are there any holes in this? Can you find any problems in this? McKinsey as a consulting company has a practice. When they take a proposal to a client, they will share a proposal to the people who have not seen this proposal. So they will try and give a view that, okay, you know what, there's something wrong here. I would not agree to this, or the client may ask you this. So the confirmation bias says that you're only looking at things from one lens. You're not looking at the other lens. You only try to look for data that confirms your belief, right? And you have to be careful with that. Now, I want to show you a very fun, quick experiment video. We'll go to the last bias, and then we'll have a Q&A. Watch this carefully. This video requires you to count something. So here we go, okay? So before we go that, as just to close out the point, for confirmation bias, you need to look at contradicting evidence. So if I think that the stock market's going to go up, I also need to find out reasons why it may go down, right? So we have to be careful. Normally, when I'm thinking that, okay, stock market's going up, I only look for data that confirms that. I don't look at any other data. So we have to be careful of having both sides of that information. Okay, here I want you to count the passes in this video. Please be attentive to see how many passes are there. Okay, take a look.
The monkey business illusion. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball.
Okay, so what do you think is the correct answer? You can put your answer in the chat. Anybody? Okay, Sandeep says 11. Thank you, Sandeep. That's incorrect. Sorry about that. Pritish 12, Jainali 9, Darshini 10, 6. No, all incorrect. 14, 10, 15. No, incorrect. 23. My goodness. No, incorrect. Okay, so I heard anywhere from 6, 9, 10, 12, 13, 22, 23, all incorrect. Okay, now forget about the numbers. I'll tell you the real answer. What else did you see? Did you see something else in this video beyond just the passes? Yes, the monkey. Okay, very good. Tanisha, thank you. Maybe you would have seen this video before. Did you see something else beyond the monkey? Okay, for those who are already familiar with this video, did you see something beyond the monkey? Okay, so let me replay. So there were more changes that were there beyond just, so first of all, let's look at the correct passes, then look at what else was happening in the background. And the point of this example is that we have to, if we're not careful, our focus becomes only what we want to see, we often miss things that are happening around us. And this is an example. So take a look. This will now reveal to you what happens. So I'm going to continue onwards.
The correct answer is 16 passes. Did you spot the gorilla? For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half missed the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it, but did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold. When you're looking for a gorilla, you often miss other unexpected events.
Again, so the message of this was a fun experiment to say that when you only look for things that confirms your belief, you do not see something that's around us. That's the point, right? All right, here's another fun one, a quick one. Watch this experiment. This was a real experiment done. Someone trying to ask directions and see what happens.
The door study. This video shows a participant from a 1998 study by Daniel Simons and Daniel Levin. Watch what happens as the unsuspecting pedestrian provides directions. The young man on the left is one of the experimenters. He has approached the white-haired man and asked for directions. Watch closely as two people carrying a door pass between them, and the first experimenter is replaced by someone else. Like many of the people in this study, the pedestrian was entirely unaware that he was talking to a different person. Approximately 50% of the people approached in this study didn't notice when the person they were talking to was replaced by someone else.
Okay, so again, so we saw that, and just to move on, again, the point was very simple. You want to make sure that you look for contradicting evidence. Otherwise, you'll only see what you want to see, right? So then again, as I said, if you think that market's going to go up, look for contradicting evidence as well, right? Now, all right, one quick one, last one before we, and then we open up for Q&A. How much is 8 times 7 times 6 times 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1? You cannot use a calculator. And I'm to help you with the answers, I am saying, is the answer closer to 1,000 or 2,000? And you can put your responses in the chat. Is the answer of this multiplication closer to 1,000 or closer to 2,000? Just go ahead and put the number on the chat. 8 times 7 times 6 times 5 times 4. I don't want you to actually solve it. I am making it easy for you. So I'm saying, is the answer actually 1,000 or 2,000? Okay, let's see. We're getting some responses. Okay, Darshani 1,000, Sandeep 2,000, Kinjal 1,000. Okay, Sandeep 2,000. Okay, excellent. So thank you for that. Now, so on an average, we get responses at 2250. Now I want to ask you another problem. How much is 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5 times 6 times 7 times 8? And to again make it easy for you, I have asked you if the answer is closer to a 500 or is it to 1,000? Go ahead and put your response in the chat. Okay, Jayesh is saying 40,000. I'm giving you a choice here. Is it 500 or is it 1,000? Okay, for the second question, not the first question. 1 times, 2 times, 3 times, 4. Okay, everyone is saying it's 1,000. Okay, Rakesh, 1,000, Tanisha, 1,000, Tanvi, 1,000. Okay, so thank you for that. And once again, the average response there normally is 512. But as someone pointed out, both are incorrect. The actual answer is 40,320. Now, what just happened? This is what we call as anchoring bias. Anchoring bias means what? I have given you a piece of data and I threw a number at you, 1,000 and 2,000. I said, please tell me. And so your brain, instead of looking at and analyzing the data, was anchored to a number that was given to you. And you shifted and you gave me an answer just closest to that number. Likewise, if you think about the second problem, it's exactly the same problem, except I have flipped it around. I have, instead of doing 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, I have done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And so normally if you start with that number, you're thinking, okay, 2 times 3 is 6, 6 times 4 is 24. Maybe it's a smaller number, therefore 500 is the correct answer. When in fact, the correct answer is 40,320. So what does this do? The anchoring bias is something that, again, we all fall prey all the time. When the government says that they are going to raise the price of petrol at 4 rupees, what happens? We automatically start expecting 4 rupees. But then they very cleverly make it 3 rupees or 350 paisa. And then we think that, oh, actually, it's a good deal, right? Because it wasn't 4, it became 350, right? So our brain gets anchored at the initial piece of data that's thrown at us, right? Now, this is something which is, again, very useful. If you are in a sales profession, you want to use the anchoring effect, meaning higher price that you can put, you can anchor the customer to buy and think of that price, right? If you're on the buying side, what do you need to do? You need to question that. You need to question and have a wider reference. You need to make sure that you question the assumptions. You need to question, make sure that you get to know how the data has come about, right? So typically, if you go to a retail store and I ask that, okay, how much is a jacket? If I said that if the jacket is 300 versus 600, right? If I say 600 and I tell you that there is a discount, you're anchored at that price, and then you say, okay, fine, 550. But if I say that now, if the jacket is at 300, your brain is shifting from that initial number, right? So what we have to be careful here is that a lot of times when we're making decisions, we have to be conscious of not getting anchored to the initial data that's thrown at us. In retail, we know that never is the price, but they always say, right? So it's always something lesser, right? So how do you overcome that? So that's the point when you think about anchoring. Okay, my very last example, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. This is what we call as the bandwagon effect or the groupthink bias, right? So I'll tell you a quick story. We had a large conglomerate client. They had 11 subsidiary companies, and they were trying to take a decision. Should they go for an umbrella branding, something like what Amul does? Should they go for what we call house of brands, meaning 11 different brands? And should they keep it that way, or should they go something in between? Now, the CEO wanted that the immediate leadership team comes up with the decision, right? But no one was speaking. And the CEO basically then said that, you know what, I think umbrella branding makes sense. And the moment CEO said that, the entire group of senior leadership team was flocking towards what he was saying without actually worrying about the consequences of, okay, will it actually be possible? And that's what we normally call as the bandwagon effect or the groupthink effect. And this happens in organizations all the time, right? Here, what is important is to make sure that you raise your hand, you stop to say that, look, I disagree, or this is why it should be something else, right? In this very particular instance, when we did a decision-making instrument on these senior leaders, we found out that 24 out of 25 people make decisions in the same exact way. They like structured information. They like to have the data by themselves and then take decisions. So it's very important that you are not falling prey to what we call as the bandwagon effect or the group bias. Okay. All right, so I will quickly summarize what we've done here. We've just done, I mean, just scratching the surface here. It's just the tip of the iceberg. There are hundreds of these kinds of biases that happen in both the business and the personal lives, right? So we talk about sunk cost bias. There we want to make sure we avoid fear of failure. Confirmation bias, look for contradicting evidence, and anchoring bias means that we want to question assumptions. The other thing you can do is 3 different things for debiasing. Remember, decision making is a muscle. The more we practice, the more we get better at it. So the first thing you have to know is that you have to be aware of some of the biases, right? So self-awareness, to the extent that you can, you create self-awareness. That's the first starting point. Now, there are leadership instruments, decision-making instruments, which help you get there. Second thing you can do is what we call as decision diary. This may seem very academic, but this is extremely important. In the example that I was sharing in the previous slide, this group of senior leaders decided to start to jot down the key decisions that they were going to take for next 6 months. What was the problem at hand? What is the decision that they're expecting? And what actually happened? And what they found out is that in 80% of the time, there was some of the other biases that they were falling prey to. So the decision diary was becoming their evidence book, which was telling them these are the biases that I'm doing all the time. And the third thing I'll say is simply slow down. Remember system 1 and system 2 thinking. System 1 thinking says we take quick decisions because so much information is coming to us. System 2 says we need to pause, we need to reflect, we need to analyze. And if we can do that, we can take better decisions, right? So just before I conclude, I want you to have a quick reflection on few things when you think about your own decision making, whether it's at work, whether it's at home, whether it is for your children, whether it's, whoever it is for. What is it that you're going to start doing? What is it that you're going to stop doing? And what is it that you're going to continue to do? Okay, if you're not self-aware, start doing that. If you're not doing the decision diaries, continue doing the decision diary, continue to do that. What would you want to stop? Right, so this is for something for you to keep in mind. And my last is, I'm going to leave you with this quote. Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards, right? So we all know that anytime we have more than few stakeholders in anything that we do, we're almost assured that some form of bias is going to come from somewhere. So we need to pause, we need to ensure the more we can do that, the better it is, right? So they say that good decisions come from experience and experience comes from bad decisions. So let us use our experience to make good decisions, okay? So that's all I have, and I'll pause because I want to leave some time for Q&A. And this is the end of the presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it was a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Nice evening.
Take care. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Nikhil.
Yeah. Bye-bye. Yeah, thank you, sir.
I would like to thank you for sparing your time. And
it's a pleasure.
All my participants for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good night. Bye-bye.